What's going on, everyone? Juicebags here, and welcome back to some Dungeon Defenders Awakened. Today it is finally time to talk about Massacre mode. So today we'll go through all of the buffs and debuffs and heroes to use and heroes not to use, and the best defenses for your journey through Massacre mode. Now I do have to say right up front, first things first, Massacre mode is a very, very active game mode. It does require your hero to be active. With that in mind, since activity is such a major part of Massacre mode, literally 100% the easiest way to get through Massacre mode is to bring a friend. If you don't have a friend, I suggest you meet a friend, as Massacre can be quite painful going through solo, although it is doable. However, with a group, life becomes just so much easier. Having another person with a different element, or having someone else to watch for the goblin copters or the djinn, just makes the game go so much smoother on Massacre mode. So strongly encouraged, go in a group. If you go in solo, like I said, it is achievable, but you are going to have some trial and error involved, and in some cases are going to have to try maps many times to get them down. I went through all of the maps solo, and although quite a few of the maps I did one-shot, some maps seem easier than others, it is quite the challenge going through solo, so I just can't stress it enough. Bring a friend, make it a party, and get after it. Now, first things first, as we know in various Dungeon Defenders games, when you go up to a new difficulty tier, it's not just scaling up the enemies and the loot. There are different buffs and debuffs that are applied to your hero and your defenses, and we're going to go through all of those right here. Starting right off, your hero damage. This is anything affected from your hero by the attack stat. So your primary shots that are being fired, your alternate shots that are being fired, anything that is directly your hero damage, your melee squings on a squire, etc., is going to be scaled down to 5.4%. Now, a lot of folks are already used to this scaling, as in Nightmare mode it got scaled down to 15.5. Massacre, it is 5.4%. So if you're doing 100 damage, you're only going to be doing just about 5.5 damage per hit. In Massacre mode, it's a big drop in that hero damage value. Now, your hero health does get scaled up. It's 7.75 times your normal tavern health, and that helps out quite a bit as survival is necessary. Your hero's armor or damage resistance values are scaled down by 45%, down to 55%. This means in order to maintain the cap, which is 90% damage reduction overall, you would have to get your armor value up to 164%. This means as you're upgrading your armor pieces, make sure you're putting those points into the actual armor stat to increase this armor value, and this is going to help you survive through Massacre mode quite a bit. Weapon projectiles and the weapon projectile speed is slowed down drastically in Massacre. In Nightmare mode, these projectiles would go about 10% of their normal speed. In Massacre, they go 1% of their normal speed. So any of your shots flying through the air are going to go through the air very slowly. In the case of like the goblin copters, if you're shooting at them from a side trajectory, you're going to want to make sure that you lead the goblin copter, as it's going to take a while for your projectile to get there. Now, this goes the same for pets. Now, pets are beast mode in Massacre, there is no doubt about it. However, the pet projectiles are down to 1% of their normal speed. Now, although hero damage gets quite the nerf in Massacre, elemental damage doesn't get nerfed quite as hard. Elemental damage is brought down to the 42% damage mark, meaning that if your elemental shots are hitting for 100 in the tavern against the dummy, in Massacre they would be hitting for 42. So it is a pretty drastic decrease in your elemental damage. However, it's not quite as extreme as the hero damage going out. Now, pets get a big boy buff. There's no doubt about it. Your pets are going to be hitting like twice as hard. Sometimes you're going to get just an extreme jump in pet damage. Now, pet damage, of course, scales with the attack stat. So depending on how much attack value you have, this number will change quite a bit. I've seen it as high as like an 80% buff in damage and as low as like a 40% buff in damage. However, damaging pets are quite beast mode in Massacre mode, no doubt, and because of these pets and this increased damage the pets are doing, it has actually created one of the meta builds, which we'll get into later on. Now moving on to your towers. One thing you're going to find in Massacre right away is you're not going to want to use your tower type defenses as often. So I'm referring to the squire defenses like the harpoon or the bowling balls, and the apprentice defenses, the deadly strikes, the flame burst tower. These are not going to be as effective in Massacre mode for two reasons. Let's just start at the top and go through all the stats. Now, first things first, although these tower type defenses are not going to be as effective, they do get a damage buff. They actually get a 62.5% damage buff in Massacre, meaning if your Deadly Striker Tower, for example, is hitting for 100, say, in the Tavern, in Massacre mode, it's going to hit for 162.5. So it does get a nice big damage buff. The tower health for the Monk, now this is referring to your aura health, gets a 15% nerf, so it's at 0.85 of its normal health amount. The tower health of the Huntress gets hit so hard with the nerf bat, you would not believe. However, one of the reasons this is the case is because traps are very, very meta in Massacre mode and extremely powerful. Now, the tower health of your traps is going to be 30% of normal. So you're only going to have 30% of the charges you normally have on your traps, meaning you will have to do some repairs and upgrades on those traps to keep them alive. In addition to that, the gas trap effect lifespan is dropped by half. So if your gas traps were channeling for, say, a minute, they're only going to be channeling for 30 seconds in Massacre mode. Now, traps get a nice damage buff in Massacre. It's actually the same buff that they had in Nightmare, and that is 35%. So all of your traps are going to hit 35% harder than they normally would while you're playing Massacre. In addition to that, the Electric Aura gets a big boy buff. It gets a 75% damage buff while playing in Massacre. This makes the Electric Aura just really an awesome defense to use in Massacre, and it fits in very, very nicely with the trap meta that goes along with it. Now, the range of your auras does get smacked. It gets shrunk down a little bit. It's not extreme, but you are going to be at 75% of your normal range on your auras. So you're going to lose 25% of their range while in Massacre. The target range, or the trigger range for Huntress traps, only goes out at 69% of its normal range. So you will see, although it's not that big of a difference from the auras, the traps feel tiny the first time you go in. You will get used to it, and remember, this is just the target range, or that inner lit up circle. The effective range of the trap is still normal, so an explosive trap, for example, although it will have a small trigger range, it is still going to have that large explosive area. The Deadly Strikes Tower gets a direct nerf in range. It goes down to 0.7. So your range on your DSTs is only going to be at 70% of its normal range. Now, DSTs, we know, shoot across the world. This is not a huge ordeal, but this does bring us up to the next debuff, which is just huge. And this is one of the reasons that make tower-type defenses not necessarily your go-to right away in Massacre mode, and that is the tower rate of all towers. So harpoons, flame bursts, magic missiles, deadly strikes, bowling ball turrets. All of these straight up get a 100% penalty to their defense rate. So if you've got that DST that's shooting for under 1 second, if you use it in Massacre, it's going to be up around that 2-second mark. And this alone, even though the DST, for example, does get a nice damage buff, this alone makes it a lot tougher to use these defenses. Now, no, in addition to that, all of the enemies hit like a truck. So your towers are going to be targeted and they are going to be destroyed very, very quickly. So although you can use towers, you're going to want to make sure that you place them in a way where they are either out of aggro range of various enemies or they are protected by something else. I personally don't even run with an apprentice in my deck when I'm doing Massacre solo, and it hurts me a little inside because I do absolutely love those apprentice defenses. But that tower rate is without a doubt a huge smackdown and a huge penalty for Massacre. Now, in addition to this, Massacre mode brings a new enemy, the Siren. Those of you that have followed the Dungeon Defenders franchise regularly over the course of many years will recognize the Siren from the early days of Dungeon Defenders 2 during the MOBA, and you can see her right here in one of the original DD2 MOBA trailers before they made the switch over to just the RPG action defense mode. Now, the Siren is going to be a very tanky girl. She's going to roll on out, and every Siren is going to have an elemental resistance. It can be any of the elements, including physical. Now, what's different about these elemental resistances is, first off, it's not 100% immunity, it's 90%. So, same note there, if you have, say, a poison Siren, and you're hitting the Siren with poison damage, you're only going to do 10% damage. And remember, your damage is already nerfed to the ground. So it's doing 10% of that already nerfed value, meaning you're going to do just very, very little damage if you don't, or if you try to match the element of the Siren. Now, the Siren does have an aura around her that will affect and apply this buff with that elemental resistance to every enemy in her area. Now, this particular elemental immunity cannot be removed by anything in the game, so Strength Drain auras, Darkness Traps, no such luck. The Arcane Barrier, it's not going to remove these resistances, and the only way to combat it is one of two things. First off, you can ignore the Siren. If you ignore the Siren, she is not going to attack you. She's going to go down the lane and debuff all the enemies, and then she's going to go back up the lane, continuing to debuff even more enemies that came out behind her, and go back into the spawn she came out. Now, you might ask, well, why not just completely ignore the Siren the whole time? As long as you're building your lane correctly with defenses, you're going to have the right element to hit the enemies that are out. Now remember, no defenses will affect a Siren, so there is no defense in the game that can hit the Siren at all, and this makes the Siren really require your active hero. Now, the reason you want to kill the Siren is because she drops the fat loot. She is a loot pinata, and in addition to being a loot pinata, she is going to drop a minimum of 70% quality for the map you're on, meaning the absolute fastest way to gear up is going to be farming Sirens. So if you can go in with a team that is using different elements and are able to combat the Sirens, you are going to find yourself gearing up very, very quickly, as that 70% minimum loot quality from the Siren just really throws piles of goodness on the ground. There's no doubt about it. Now, since in Massacre mode, traps are your friend, first off, they're powerful, second off, they can't be destroyed other than destroying themselves by losing charges. This means you want to use traps heavily, and in addition to that, you want to use crowd control wherever you can. I personally, on every Massacre map I run, I will normally have a gas trap and an ensnare aura on every single lane throughout the map. Now remember, Massacre is not for the weak at heart, so you're going to want to fully gear up in Nightmare gear before you get in your attempts. I've said it over and over again, definitely go in with a team, bring friends. The way you combat the mixed elemental resistances on the enemies and the way you kill the siren itself is you have a varied team. So say one person is, say, a huntress that has upgraded their range damage on their weapon and is using all physical damage. And say you've got another hero that is, say, a monk with elemental damage upgraded. Remember, the monk's hero boost will affect elemental damage as well, so you can end up putting out a decent amount of elemental damage if you go in on a monk. Although damaging pets are extremely powerful, the majority of the time that I'm playing on either the huntress or a monk, I am normally using either a genie to keep my various boost from the huntress or the monk up 100% of the time, or I'm usually using a propeller cat, one of the two. Now, here's the deal. Obviously, you want to play it on hardcore. This is not like Nightmare mode. If you die on hardcore in Nightmare mode when you're waiting for your respawn at the end of the wave, there's a really solid chance, quite often, that your defenses will just hold out and you'll be good through the wave. This is not going to happen in Massacre, particularly if you're playing solo. You want to play hardcore because it's such a huge loot modifier. However, if you die, it's probably going to end your map, and you just need to get used to that. Now, by all means, if you're just playing through them and trying to unlock the maps just so you can do different ones or the various challenges, you know, by all means, don't toggle the hardcore on, blow through the maps, and try to get everything unlocked without a doubt. Now, coming back around to the extreme pet damage. This combines two things. First off, you don't want to die. Well, who's never going to die? It is a tanky boy Squire. If you enjoy playing the Squire, right now is your time to shine, because the Squire is an absolute beast. By blocking with the Squire, you can avoid most damage from bosses, from mobs, from literally everything, and you can tote around a dragon pet, or say a monkey king pet, or any sort of damaging pet that will sit there and just wreck, because that pet is getting a huge damage buff as well. So the Squire is without a doubt one of the go-to picks for many players right now, as the Squire can very easily become indestructible just by preparing your armor value, stacking a little vitality, and then just blocking if something big's about to hit you, and can still put out a very impressive amount of damage through a pet. As far as solo, what I personally usually do is I will usually either go with a Squire with a dragon pet, a huntress with either a genie or a prop cat, or a monk upgraded in elemental damage with either a genie, a prop cat, or a damaging pet. In most cases, I will use a genie on both the huntress and the monk just to keep my buff up, my personal boost up 100% of the time. If I go on a Squire, I've got a Squire that's into the vitality stat and the attack stat. This gives me a lot higher hero health, and we know the Squire scales hero health like crazy, but plus it gives me some attack value, so my weapon swings are hitting a little bit harder, and your pet is doing a little bit more damage. Now you can upgrade elemental weapon or elemental damage on a Squire sword as well, and get a little elemental damage out there. Remember, your buff from the Squire does affect elemental damage as well, so you can go physical or elemental on the Squire, whichever you personally choose. Some folks are doing like 50-50 upgrades on a weapon, where you upgrade it 50% into range, 50% into element. I personally don't feel like that's a great choice, but I do know that other folks have had success with it. I personally have not. So what I normally do if I go in solo is I'm going to basically ignore the siren element that I can't kill. So for example, if I'm going into a match solo on a huntress, I'm not going to go engage any of the physical sirens. I'm just going to lose out on that loot. Now, you can still kill them, it just will take forever. It's up to you, really, what you want to do there. I personally usually just ignore them, that way I can get to another run afterwards, where hopefully I get a little better RNG on what elements come out from the sirens. Where groups can be so strong, in my opinion, the perfect group composition would be first off a squire. Get a tanky boy in there to kite ogres around, to distract bosses, and to set up the DPS characters where they can just clean house. So have a squire on your team is just always a great move. In addition to that, the other 3 characters, you can really go with whatever you want. However, I would suggest one of the 3 always be a boost monk. The boost monk, of course, is going to buff the team. It's going to buff the hero damage and the elemental damage. So a boost monk is just a good thing to have around. The apprentice, you don't see a whole lot of people using in Massacre, I'm going to be honest, and it comes down to the level of squishiness. The apprentice has no movement speed boost, so when you use overcharge on the apprentice, it doesn't make you run any faster, and the apprentice is going to have some survivability issues in Massacre, and I personally think that's one of the reasons you don't see the apprentice there very often. So once again, in my mind, the perfect team, or the composition I personally usually look for, is at least one person on a squire, have a boost monk, and then have either a monk or a huntress that has a cat, a prop cat, that has multiple targets. Remember, a prop cat will buff the team as well if they're in range. Now, if you stack these together where you've got, say, a squire that's tanking a boss and keeping it away from the damaging heroes, and then you've got a boost monk with, say, a genie, and a huntress with, say, a propeller cat standing next to each other, those 2 characters are going to dish out the pain really, really heavily, because all of those buffs are going to stack together. So hopefully this helps everyone's journey into Massacre mode. There will be lots and lots of full Massacre builds coming to the channel as time permits. I'm going to work hard to try to get at least one for every map done over the next couple of weeks. So definitely keep an eye out for those. But if you have any questions about Massacre mode, or any suggestions, particularly for a new player that's just breaking in to Massacre from Nightmare mode, by all means, let me know down in the comments below. But that will do it for now. Thank you all an absolute ton for watching. Make sure to click that like button and please subscribe to the channel, and I will bring you much, much more Dungeon Defenders and Tower Defense related content on a daily basis. All of the scaling type information on defenses, towers, and enemies in this video was taken directly from the data mine sheet put together from the IC and Zaltenos. There will be a link down in the description below to that as well. Has tons of good info in it. So thank you all once again, and I'll see ya next time around.